Welcome to Dispatches, the official podcast for the Journal of the American Revolution.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Dispatches. I'm your host, Brady Kreitzer. Today our guest is Molly Fortune, CEO of South Carolina 250, and she'll be talking about the recent publication of the Papers of Francis Marion. Molly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Molly, you're a first-time guest. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Well, I am no neuroscientist, but I definitely love history. I was brought to this through a rather interesting set of events. Being in the architecture field and historic preservation, you get to experience all these wonderful stories, but usually they're related to a building. And the two buildings that really spoke to me the most were in the entertainment industry at the Fox Theater and then here in Newberry, South Carolina. And we were using those buildings, those historic buildings, to tell the story of the communities that they were in. And then once COVID happened, I got a little tired and wanted something a little new and got a great call and said, "Can you tell stories without a building?" And I said, "Well, I think you've got enough terrain that we can definitely tell a story." And that's how I got bitten by the SC250 bug. But history's always been a way that you can connect with the past, and believe it or not, it's not stagnant, and it's been a real joy.
All right, so Molly, tell us if you could, where does this project come from? Marion has been a figure that's been present in American history really since the Revolution. We've had his papers. What made South Carolina 250 say now's the time to publish these?
Mainly because our chairman at the time, Charles Baxley, who we unfortunately lost a year ago to cancer, had been working with a really good friend of his, Dave Nealon, out of Pennsylvania. And he had really gotten Dave to do this. And it took Dave close to 20 years to compile everything. And there were letters that no one had known about before. Great context that had been done. Other papers had been done as well in the time period. And Charles really said, now is the time to do this. And the 250th Commission is the one that's going to do this and allow it to live in perpetuity. And he had two requests. One, that it be born digitally, and two, that it be free to the public. And through that process of working with Dave Nealon, we were able to publish them free of charge and on digitally, frankly. But it was Charles Baxley and Dave Nealon that said, there's enough research now that we can really hone in on that story. And funny enough, a couple letters have been found since we published the first volume.
Of course.
Great.
So Molly, let's talk a little bit about Marion. Important figure, complicated figure for sure. Why do you think he still stays with us well into the 21st century? What do you think about him lets him continue historically to be part of our lives?
Well, I think Walt Disney helped a lot. Most people, when we post something on our Facebook page with the SC250, people say, "I remember Leslie Nielsen, the Swamp Fox," and people can sing that song all day long. That really, really helped. But this is an enigma. This was a really new type of warfare in the South and in the colonies as well, and that just really stuck. Who is this guy? He wasn't married at the time. He was in and out. What was his story? I think that just the persona of him grew over time. He's a character for sure. Man of little words. Sometimes would write in his letters simply, "We need coffee," and I can understand that any day of the week. But I think Disney really helped that whole conversion of him into this great figure. Now, I will say that his Band of Merry Men, if you will, sure helped as well. There are places all across the country, Marion, Illinois, as a matter of fact, which were land grants given to his soldiers. And they were incredibly dedicated. So I think that they also helped really tell that story in a time period when he wasn't really interested in writing his autobiography.
Yeah, I was in South Carolina just a few weeks ago and visiting some, important revolutionary history sites. South Carolina is the kind of state where it seems like any major highway you're on, there's going to be an exit for a battlefield somewhere. It's really flooded with Revolutionary War history. So I'm going to throw you out an easy question. How would you describe South Carolina's role in the American Revolution?
It was one here, period. That's it. We sent Cornwallis on up to Virginia because he needed some replacements and some sun and some water. But it was one here. It was decisively one in South Carolina. And it was because of people like Francis Marion, Thomas Sumter, Andrew Pickens, Mrs. Mott, all of our characters, the Catawbas, the Cherokees. It involved every single person, whether they liked it or not. And we wore them out. We were not what we were expecting. We were not what the British or Clinton was expecting. Thought there'd be a whole lot more loyalists out here. Turns out, not so much.
Excellent. It's definitely the cases to be made for that, for sure. So Molly, you've been probably asked this question a lot. If someone doesn't know anything about Francis Marion, what's the sort of biographical sketch that you give them?
That's a great question because we've uncovered a lot more about his life.
Of course, yeah.
And, he was a Huguenot. His parents were Huguenots that came. And if you don't know what that is, that's a really big piece of South Carolina history that's incredibly important, especially with the religious freedom. Was a very astute young man and really paid attention, was very, very close to his family, and was incredibly thoughtful about how he approached the conflict with Britain and with the creation of the colonies. And then what do we do afterwards? These are our neighbors and our friends. And he wrote extensively about how to integrate those folks that had been previous enemies back into everyday society, and you just go on. And everybody moves forward. And then, of course, he was a statesman later in life that also shaped how we view the revolution, how we view our friends, and how we view our state government and federal government. Mm-hmm. He had a hand in a lot of different things.
So, Molly, you and I come from different aspects of the historical world. You said you worked in architecture and historic buildings. Those have their own unique challenges. I come from an academic background. We're all dealing with the same sources, but publishing papers has to be uniquely challenging in its own way. Could you talk maybe about the process of how you go about organizing papers and publishing papers, and maybe what are some of the unexpected pitfalls you ran into you didn't expect?
Always have a good team. Don't do it by yourself. We had an amazing editorial group. We have a great publisher. We had several folks that had nothing to do with the Marion himself that sat in on our committee meetings and would give us insight. Take advantage of technology. There is so much information out there that you can easily link to that we came in contact with. So do we want to link here? Do we want to hit here? Who is your audience? Is it always going to be the historian? It may not be. It may be someone like me who has fallen in love with it, but could give two rears about a flank and just really wants to know more about these complicated characters and the complicated time they lived in. The other part to really recognize is that it's not linear. It is very, very deep. There are a lot of things going on at the time. When a letter gets missed or this happens here, there are things that go along that you're not prepared for. We spent hours on Zoom calls and together going through it, and are we using the nomenclature correctly? Is it loyalist? Is it patriot? Is it Whig? Is it Tory? And being very consistent, and then making the decisions about misspellings. Do you keep the misspellings in the letter, but do you change them in the translation? Or the transcription, excuse me. Those types of things have to be worked out. Our biggest stumbling block, funny enough, were maps. Maps. The other thing that Charles gave us is, I want you to be able to go there. I want you to be able to walk where Marion walked. So then it's like, okay, is that private property? Do you put a GPS coordinate in there? So the maps, funny enough, ended up being one of the hardest things.
So Molly, I had the chance to go through these letters very, very briefly. I mean, it's a project you could spend months on. I learned a lot just in the few handful of letters that I was able to read. Can you think of any instances that kind of stopped you in your tracks reading through these personally that surprised you about Marion?
There are two things that really surprised me. One is his ability to think in a very broad stroke about the future. And there would be these fabulous epistle wars, as in the middle of a battle, going back and forth between the commander on the other side and Marion, talking about prisoners of war and how we're treating them and how we're doing this. Meanwhile, he's tracking somebody and this is going on here. But he felt it was so important to have those conversations about how do we treat these people and how are you treating our people, and getting that really worked out. I was talking to Rick Wise, who was one of our editors, and I said, Rick, to me it feels like this could honestly be the start of the Geneva Convention, where we talk about how we're going to treat prisoners, parole. Everything was changing at that point in time. Parole meant nothing out here at the end of the day. That really surprised me. The second is, not many people mention this name in the same sentence with Francis Marion, but the relationship he had with Thomas Sumter. When we were on the phone call just last week, and we were talking about Volume 2, and I said, what would be amazing, because Ben is one of the other editors, and Valley's our publisher, and she's also working on some maps for Volume 2, which is 1781, but can we show where the letters were going? And that's been the biggest thing, is that the communication, where a lot of people jumped in, and this is where historians get in big trouble, is that the assumption is, he just didn't like something. He just ignored his letter. When in fact, the letter missed him by 4 miles. And he didn't see it for days. So it's easy to fall into some of these traps, to say, I often ask, did they ever sit on the front porch together and go, hey, remember that time? You wonder about things like that because it is so complicated. So the two things that really stuck out to me were how he was incredibly focused on the art of war and what was going to happen afterwards, and how a lot has been misinterpreted between him and Thomas Sumter.
Molly, let's get to probably the question a lot of people watching this want to know. How do we access this new publication that South Carolina 250 has put out, and who do you hope uses these letters? How would you like to see them put into play?
Well, the first part is an easy one. You can go to our website. You can either go to sc250.com or southcarolina250.com. Spell it out, but the numbers are numbers.com, and it's under publications, and it's free to use. There's lots of other great publications there as well. Slave manumissions, women's stories, fabulous things. So you can really go down a rabbit hole rather quickly. I hope that people of all interest groups will dive into these papers. And you don't have to start at the beginning. You could just pick it up, a letter, and read some context and see who these characters are. And you can meet Francis Marion on your own terms, instead of having to pick up a book and, start at page 1 with the introduction. I hope that people meet Francis Marion through these papers where they are and where Francis Marion was at the time period.
Excellent. So, this is a busy time for all of us, the 250th anniversary of the Revolution. Can you tell us maybe some other projects that you have in the pipeline?
Well, coming up next will be Volume 2, and then followed by Volume 3 of the Francis Marion papers, again, online and free for the public. Coming really hot on his heels, so to speak, is the Thomas Sumter papers, and then right after that are Lord Rawdon's papers. We have things ranging from sponsoring the Cooper River Bridge Run, just to get people aware, all the way to firearms expositions, Liberty Day at the State House, which we're going to copy off of Oklahoma. Thank you to our Oklahoma friends. So kids can understand how the sausage is made. We've been asked by the Department of Education to really work with them on putting civics back into the game. But we've got some pretty big anniversaries. We got the first blood in November 19th of 2025, which is the first Southerner killed in the Southern Department right here in 96, not too far from here. And then quickly following on those heels are lots of little massacres and things that also happen. But then you got Carolina Day. And if you're not familiar with that, a week before the Declaration of Independence was even signed, we had briefed the British Navy at Fort Sullivan for the first time in over 200 years. So that's a big deal for us. And that what we're doing with that is taking June 28th and then we're ending it on July 4th. Have a great celebration in Charleston. Charleston is one of the federally recognized signature cities. But all 46 counties in South Carolina are going to have fabulous events that anybody can participate in, from kayak tours to the barbecue trail to whatever you want to do. Our counties are working very, very hard to accept those tourists into the backcountry. And then from there, for South Carolina, comes to the Southern Department, and we're off to the races.
Yeah. Boy, I think a lot of states, could follow in your lead and do very well for the amount of events and material you've made available. It's really special. So
we're here to help.
Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're, reach out for sure. Okay, Molly, so this is the question we always end with on this show. It really kind of gets to the heart of what we do as historians, as people who work in museums and teach in schools. How do you think this project, the Marion Papers, helps us understand the Revolutionary Era better?
Great question. I think it shows, for me, when people say, oh, we're in the most divisive time. Oh, this is the hardest time America's ever had. If you read the Marion Papers, you have an immediate connection to the people that actually walked the ground. There were no trains. Walked it to put this great American experiment into motion and into reality. And you realize that they're people just like us. They wanted coffee. They wanted to go home. They wanted a home-cooked meal. They wanted the things that we want today.
Molly Fortune, South Carolina 250, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Brady.
And okay, so I'll hit this stop button here, Molly. So we're going to